So welcome everybody. For your information, I will speak English today, and also for our guests from Limburg here somewhere or in the Netherlands, the presentation will be in Dutch. So hereby I open officially this academic ceremony in which Mr. Roy van Hooren will defend his academic thesis entitled Imaging Early Brain Characteristics of Alzheimer's Disease, Structure, Function and Symptomatology. May I invite you, Mr. van Hooren, to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis in the next 15 minutes.
Dank u. Nou, beste vrienden, collega's, familie en ook leden van de corona en ook viewers online. Het is mijn eer om vandaag mijn proefschrift te mogen verdedigen, Imaging Early Brain Characteristics of Alzheimer's Disease, Structure, Function en Symptomatology. Oftewel in kaart brengen van vroege hersenkenmerken van de ziekte van Alzheimer. Het is belangrijk om onderscheid te maken tussen de ziekte van Alzheimer en dementie. Dementie is namelijk een verzamelterm voor een syndroom waarbij de werking van hersenen ernstig is verstoord. Maar dat kan veroorzaakt worden door bijvoorbeeld Parkinson, beroerte. Maar de grootste oorzaak van dementie is de ziekte van Alzheimer. Naar schatting lijden momenteel 300.000 mensen in Nederland aan dementie. En de verwachting is dat het tegen het jaar 2050 stijgt tot 620.000 personen. Nou, naast natuurlijk de verwoestende gevolgen van de ziekte voor de patiënten en de naasten, gaat er ook tientallen miljarden euro's per jaar naar zorg voor deze ziekte. De ziekte van Alzheimer wordt gekenmerkt door een aantal zaken, voornamelijk door een geleidelijke achteruitgang van het denkvermogen. Dit noemen we ook al cognitieve achteruitgang. Het wordt ook gekenmerkt door beta-amyloïd, een eiwit dat zich ophoopt in de hersenen. Hier weergegeven als een klompje eiwit in de pootjes van Midas die we laatst zijn verloren eerder dit jaar. En het wordt ook gekenmerkt door het tau-eiwit. Deze twee eiwitten dragen samen bij aan schade aan de hersenen en de daaraan verwante cognitieve achteruitgang. Het wordt steeds duidelijker dat er bij de ziekte van Alzheimer al veel gebeurt voordat deze cognitieve achteruitgang te zien is. We zien dat beta-amyloïd en tau zich ophoopt in het hersenvocht al jaren voordat cognitieve achteruitgang te zien is. Deze witte stippelling geeft weer op welk niveau van beta-amyloïd en tau over het algemeen spreken van een verhoging van deze eiwitten. Dit is ook over het algemeen het punt waarop klinische interventies worden toegepast, die proberen de ziekte tegen te gaan. Je ziet echter al dat al voor die witte lijn dat beta-amyloïd en tau beginnen toe te nemen. Het is daarom ook belangrijk dat we goed begrijpen wat er nou gebeurt in die allervroegste fases van de ziekte, om zo effectief mogelijk de ziekte te kunnen bestrijden. Vandaar ook de hoofdvraag van mijn proefschrift: kunnen we hersenveranderingen identificeren die vroeg betrokken zijn bij de ophoping van beta-amyloïd en tau? En met informatie kunnen we beter mensen selecteren die een verhoogd risico hebben op de ziekte van Alzheimer. En ook deze mensen kunnen we dan uitnodigen om deel te nemen aan onderzoeken die proberen de ziekte te bestrijden. Nou, we doen dit aan de hand van een aantal hoofdstukken. Ik ga vandaag 3 hoofdstukken aan u uitleggen. In één hoofdstuk kijken we naar bepaalde hersennetwerken die samen met beta-amyloïd iets zeggen over het geheugen. In hoofdstuk 3 kijken we naar de zogenaamde blauwe kern en hoe die samen met Alzheimer-eiwitten iets kan zeggen over de gezondheid van de hersenen. En in hoofdstuk 6 kijken we naar, met speciale krachtige MRI-scanners die we hier in Maastricht hebben, nog eens extra goed naar die blauwe kern en hoe die samen met tau-eiwitten iets kunnen zeggen over slaapproblemen. Nou, klinkt heel ingewikkeld, maar ik ga hier rustig doorheen lopen. De verspreiding van beta-amyloïd is namelijk geen willekeurig proces. Je ziet hier de hersenen afgebeeld met daarachter een silhouet van een hoofd. Je ziet dus de voorkant van de hersenen, de achterkant. En aan de onderkant zie je daar de hersenstam. Daar zit ook die blauwe kern waar ik het over heb gehad. Die zal ook later terugkomen. En de hersenen zijn eigenlijk altijd actief. En met behulp van MRI-scanners kunnen we deze activiteit meten. En dan zien we dat ook tijdens rust de hersenen eigenlijk al actief zijn en bepaalde hersennetwerken ontstaan in de hersenen die bijdragen aan de werking van bijvoorbeeld geheugen en andere cognitieve processen. En interessant is dat we juist in die netwerken zien dat beta-amyloïd zich graag opstapelt. Het idee is dat omdat deze netwerken zoveel actief zijn, dat die activiteit bijdraagt aan de ophoping van die beta-amyloïd. In hoofdstuk 2 hebben we gekeken naar de relatie tussen beta-amyloïd en het geheugen. En of het daarbij uitmaakt hoe die hersennetwerken zijn georganiseerd. Zijn deze hersennetwerken tegelijkertijd actief en werken ze daarom misschien goed samen? Of zijn deze hersennetwerken juist niet tegelijkertijd actief en werken ze misschien niet zo goed samen? Bij deze studie zijn mensen in het begin een hersenscan gehad, een MRI-scan, en is ook een beta-amyloïdniveau gemeten. Daarna zijn die mensen een aantal jaren gevolgd en is hun geheugen ook elk jaar gemeten. Nou, blijkt als die hersennetwerken, bij de mensen waar die hersennetwerken eigenlijk tegelijkertijd actief zijn en dus goed samenwerken, blijkt dat ondanks dat amyloïd verhoogd is, dat het geheugenprestatie eigenlijk vrij constant blijft. Dat ziet u in de linker grafiek. Als die hersennetwerken niet tegelijkertijd actief zijn, zien we dat wanneer amyloïd verhoogd is, dat het geheugen ook achteruit gaat over tijd. Het zijn ook juist deze mensen die we graag willen uitnodigen voor klinische interventies, omdat bij deze mensen als eerste zal duidelijk worden of medicatie kan helpen tegen geheugenverlies. Nou, als we dan kijken naar tau, het andere eiwit, zien we daar een heel ander patroon. En dan zien we juist dat dit graag toeneemt in die blauwe kern. En we zien al heel vroeg in het ziekteproces dat dat tau-niveau samenhangt met de omvang van die blauwe kern. Ja, dus al heel vroeg in het ziekteproces lijkt die blauwe kern betrokken te zijn. De blauwe kern is ook belangrijk voor het stofje noradrenaline in de hersenen. En noradrenaline wordt in de hersenen omgezet tot andere stofjes, zogenaamde metabolieten. Nou, dat is een normaal proces, maar we zien dat bij mensen met de ziekte van Alzheimer dat die metabolieten verhoogd zijn. We weten ook dat bij dit proces Alzheimer-eiwitten kunnen vrijkomen. En daarom vroegen we in hoofdstuk 3 ons af of informatie over de metabolieten en Alzheimer-eiwitten, of die iets kunnen zeggen over de gezondheid van de hersenen. En inderdaad zien we in het hoofdstuk dat wanneer deze metabolieten, amyloïd, beta-amyloïd en tau verhoogd zijn, dat er bepaalde stukken in de hersenen zijn die een verminderde gezondheid vertonen. Daarbij is het interessant te zien dat deze gebieden juist veel informatie ontvangen vanuit die blauwe kern. Ook nog interessanter is dat dit al plaatsvindt voor de beta-amyloïd die grens bereikt die ik eerder heb genoemd, dus die witte stippenlijn, waaruit blijkt dat die blauwe kern echt belangrijk is bij het begin van de ziekte. De blauwe kern is ook belangrijk bij een aantal cognitieve processen, zoals dus aandacht en de geheugen. Maar het is ook erg belangrijk bij het reguleren van slaap. Ook is interessant dat slaapproblemen een risicofactor zijn voor de ziekte van Alzheimer. Daarom hebben we in hoofdstuk 6 nog eens extra goed gekeken met die krachtige MRI-scanners of we de gezondheid van die blauwe kern kunnen relateren aan slaapproblemen. Interessant aan slaap namelijk is dat het een belangrijke rol speelt bij het als het ware schoonmaken van de hersenen. Het opruimen van afvalproducten, zoals bijvoorbeeld die Alzheimer-eiwitten. Als er dan iets fout gaat in die blauwe kern, kunnen er slaapproblemen ontstaan en kan dus ook dit schoonmaakproces verhinderd worden. Nou, als we daardoor dus meer van die eiwitten kunnen opstapelen, kan het weer leiden tot meer schade aan die blauwe kern, wat weer meer leidt tot meer slaapproblemen. En dan ontstaat een soort cyclus die kan leiden tot meer slaapproblemen en slechte hersengezondheid. In de proefschrift zien we inderdaad dat die blauwe kern, de gezondheid van die blauwe kern, samenhangt met slaapproblemen. En dat dit vooral het geval is als ook die tau-pathologie verhoogd is. Met deze informatie kunnen we dus misschien mensen selecteren die veel baat hebben bij een therapie die slaap verbetert om zo geheugenachteruitgang mogelijk te voorkomen. Dat kunnen we bijvoorbeeld doen door speciale slaapkussens, met smartwatches en bepaalde apps om de slaapkwaliteit te verbeteren. En we kunnen ook speciale therapieën aanbieden om slaap te verbeteren, bijvoorbeeld sporttherapieën. Er zijn cognitieve therapieën beschikbaar. En dan kunnen we op een laagdrempelige manier eigenlijk de slaap verbeteren, mogelijk ook het geheugen. Om dan terug te komen bij de hoofdvraag van het proefschrift, kunnen we een aantal zaken stellen. In hoofdstuk 2 zien we dat informatie over beta-amyloïd en de organisatie van hersennetwerken kan helpen om gerichtere deelnemers te selecteren voor vroege klinische interventies tegen beta-amyloïd. In hoofdstuk 3 zien we de informatie over tau en metabolieten van de blauwe kern mogelijk voor de beta-amyloïd verhoogd is in verband kunnen worden gebracht met verslechterde hersenintegriteit. En de integriteit van de blauwe kern is verbonden met slaapproblemen, vooral als tau ook verhoogd is. Het verbeteren van slaap is dan ook een aantrekkelijk en laagdrempelig doelwit om vroegtijdig het risico op dementie te verminderen. En dat leidt dus inderdaad erop dat we al vroeg in het ziekteproces van Alzheimer hersenkenmerken kunnen zien die gerelateerd zijn aan beta-amyloïd en tau. Nou, wetenschappers zijn wetenschappers en meer vragen oproept dan dat het antwoorden geeft. Daar staan er nog veel zaken voor de toekomst. Bijvoorbeeld als we kijken naar die hersennetwerken samen met amyloïd en het geheugen, is de vraag welke rol speelt tau dan daarbij? Ook hebben we de slaapkwaliteit nu gemeten met vragenlijsten. Maar misschien kunnen we het ook nog verbeteren met smartwatches of andere manieren om het slaap te meten. Ook zal het belangrijk zijn om te kijken of de bevindingen in het proefschrift ook op individueel niveau prognostische waarde hebben voor de kliniek. En daarmee geef ik graag het woord terug aan de prorector.
Dank u wel, meneer Van Hooren. U bent ruim op tijd. Dat betekent dat we extra tijd hebben om nog met van u gedachten te gaan wisselen. Daarvoor wil ik u alvast hartelijk danken. Ja, prima. We will switch to English for the rest of the discussion. We have one opponent who is not able to have a good discussion in Dutch. And we have two opponents who will be online for the people here in the audience. Er zijn 2 mensen die gaan met u van gedachten wisselen via de online presentatie, maar dat ziet het publiek straks zelf. We will start the discussion with Professor Linden. Professor Linden was the chairman of your assessment committee. He's professor in translation neuroscience, and I would like to give him the opportunity to discuss with you at first opportunity. Professor Linden.
Thank you, dear candidate. Thank you very much for this very interesting and visually very appealing presentation, and also for your thesis, which I read with great pleasure. Also, congratulations to your promotion team. I would like to start by asking one of your paranymphs to come to the microphone and read out thesis 3 for us, which we may then have to translate into English afterwards.
Stelling 3. Vroege hersenveranderingen gerelateerd aan de ziekte van Alzheimer zijn verbonden met frequente nachtelijke ontwakingen. Het verbeteren van de slaapkwaliteit is een laagdrempelig doel voor preventiestrategieën tegen de ziekte van Alzheimer. Dit proefschrift.
Thank you. So the thesis about early brain changes in relation to Alzheimer's pathology associated with sleep disturbance, essentially when people report waking up more frequently, so in the night, and you found that that was associated also with changes in the locus coeruleus, with lack of integrity of the locus coeruleus in chapter 6, I think. So perhaps you can just walk us through the concept behind this. What is the relationship between the locus coeruleus and noradrenergic activity and sleep, which I think you cover in the introduction of that chapter, both from animal and human studies?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your kind words and your question. So you're asking about the relationship between the locus coeruleus and sleep in Alzheimer's disease. So the locus coeruleus does play an important role in the regulation of sleep, and primarily it's involved in waking.
Please speak into the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Like this. So the locus coeruleus is important for sleep, and it's the first place where, or one of the first places where we see tau pathology. And I think also I briefly touched upon it in my introduction talk. If sleep is important for the clearance of amyloid and tau. So if sleep is disrupted, this could also lead to increased pathology in Alzheimer's disease, and in turn also decreased integrity of the locus coeruleus. So there's essentially a vicious cycle of pathology, worsening sleep, and then in turn worsening the symptoms.
So if you were to speculate on a causality here, which is limited in this cross-sectional
Yes.
study, I think, what would you say in your population in chapter 6?
Yeah, if sleep or pathology is the causal factor. So I think the pathology is the causal factor. Of course, that needs to be validated in experimental research. But since tau pathology is first seen in that locus coeruleus, I would expect that leads to sleep problems, which then in turn again exacerbates the pathology. I think that's the most logical explanation for this cyclists. Yeah.
But in this case, you're saying here in thesis 3 that sleep prevention can potentially also prevent Alzheimer's. Well, sleep improvement can also potentially prevent Alzheimer's. But if the disrupted sleep is already a consequence of beginning Alzheimer's pathology,
Yes.
how would that work?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So I think even though the pathology is probably the causal factor, I think we can still treat the results of the pathology to further prevent accumulation of this pathology.
Mitigate progression.
Exactly.
And how would you do that in relation to the noradrenergic system specifically? I mean, you mentioned sport, and I mean, that's always generally a good recommendation, I suppose, but not specific sleep therapy. How would you improve sleep quality?
So like I said, there are certain companies that are looking at specific special sleep pillows, and there are apps with meditation programs to improve sleep. I mean, you could of course look into medication to improve sleep, but
yes, I was going to ask you about that. Yes, because particularly in relation to the norepinephrine system.
Yeah.
How central is it to improving sleep quality?
I think it's crucial, of course. The looks really plays a very important role in the sleep regulation. However, I don't know if it's, for example, if you start adding medication that improves sleep, the question is if that's not going to affect the normal function of looks really in the long run. So I would think ideally.
Yes. Well, hang on. Why not? I mean, if you were to use a presynaptic alpha 2 blocker, for example.
Yeah.
You would influence, wouldn't you, norepinephrine release?
Yeah. Yeah. So
in end organs, I suppose, or in.
So it remains to be seen, right? It's possible that the medication could be an effective way to improve sleep, but this would have to be tested, right? So if it is effective in improving sleep, is it effective in indeed then reducing also decline of Lucas Aurelius health? These are things that have to be investigated. I think preferably it's a non-medicinal approach. Like with apps or with exercises, but certainly medicinal approach should also be investigated.
And perhaps one final question. So what is generally the role of the locus coeruleus and noradrenergic firing in sleep?
Sorry, can you?
What is generally the role of the noradrenergic system in sleep?
Yeah, so mainly it's involved in the waking process. So so that's also why we see here in this chapter specifically the awakenings that are related to the integrity of Lucas Aurelius. So I think if we, for example, look at certain ways to treat sleep problems, I think nocturnal awakenings will be one of the first outcome measures that we should investigate to see if the treatments improve sleep indeed and Lucas Aurelius health. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. I'll give the word back to the pro-rector.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Professor Reeds. She is affiliated with the University of Aachen and appointed as Professor of Translational Neurodegeneration. And I'd like to give her the word.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, thanks first for this really nice presentation. I have two questions. My first question is about cardiovascular factors. We all know Alzheimer's disease is an age-related disease, meaning that we have to deal with usually older patients with increasing comorbidities, such as hypertension, diabetes, these diseases like that. And this usually affects also imaging measures, for example, functional connectivity. So how did you, or how should we deal with cardiovascular comorbidities? Did you screen for it, or how should we do it in the future, in particular for FABSICAs, white matter abnormalities? And what do you think how this may influence or impacted your work? That's my first question.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your questions. and your compliments. So indeed, you're asking about the vascular factors that might influence the work. First of all, in general, the samples are screened for the most severe cardiovascular comorbidities, so that the most clear cases of vascular dementia are not included in these analyses. But of course, there is a possibility that more subtle vascular influences play a role. So I think these vascular things might influence the brain flow, so the cerebral blood flow, and this is something that should definitely be considered when looking at, for example, functional connectivity analyses. If there's a decrease of cerebral blood flow in certain areas, that might influence the fMRI signal. How exactly to correct for that? I think it's difficult because it's hard to say specifically where in the brain you would expect certain reduced blood flow so it's hard to correct for that, but I think it's definitely something that needs to be considered.
And for example, for hypertension, we know that it can lead to quite severe particles and white matter abnormalities. There can be microbleeds in Alzheimer's disease. And doing imaging, it's always important to look for it and also to have inclusion and exclusion criteria. And you are absolutely correct saying that you have to look where are these changes. We also know that there are strategic locations that can have much more higher impact than other ones.
Yes. Yeah. So, I think the question is then, of course, Sorry.
I'm sorry for interrupting. There was quite a delay. My question is, for your work, your imaging, you did you have any inclusion/exclusion criteria in respect to cardiovascular disease?
Yeah. So it differs per chapter. But for example, in the strain study that we have most of the data from in the thesis, we do exclude for the clear vascular dementia, so clear vascular insults, stroke. So it's a very clear signs of vascular disease, but we do not exclude people who have hypertension, for example. We do collect information about hypertension. So I think in future analysis we can definitely add that as a factor to see, does this influence functional connectivity outcomes. That's definitely something to consider. For now, I think things like education could be used as a covariate. If education correlates to, for example, healthy lifestyle, which might then correlate to vascular health. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think we really need to study the exact patterns of brain blood flow changes to really use them as a very nice covariate in functional connectivity analysis, for example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about sleep. So we know that sleep, as you already pointed it out in your presentation and in your work, plays an important role in the development of Alzheimer's disease. However, we also know that measures of sympathetic system, leukocytes, functional connectivity are very time and work intensive measures. So thinking about clinical trial design or just clinical practice, what is in your way the way to go for the future? How do we approach it? What are your suggestions?
So to use sleep in the clinical practice, if I answer correctly, or should I answer your?
It is about sleep, because sleep is a very important factor, and we also know that the sympathetic system is involved. You showed in your work the important role of the local spheres, of the functional connectivity. But we all know that analyzing these imaging measures is quite work and time intensive. So what did you suggest for the future? How can we use these measures in a more faster, more practical way? For example, thinking about including it in clinical trial designs. What is the way to go?
Yeah, so adding like MRI measures to in the clinic, of course, that's it's something we can do, but it's expensive, of course, to do that. I think we need to establish whether something like functional connectivity in relation to amyloid and memory performance, if indeed that has a good prognostic value. Right, so if we can see if functional connectivity really does add a prognostic value at the individual level to amyloid pathology, it really might be worth to add this to the clinic. If, for example, with this we can really predict a prognosis for a patient or someone with, for example, subjective memory complaints, then I think an MRI scan might be a reasonable cost to make in the clinic. Yeah. I'm sure that answers your question.
Yes, I was also thinking a little bit more faster ways in terms of using artificial intelligence, faster ways in analyzing imaging modalities.
To interrupt, and we have to continue to the next opponent.
Okay,
So
maybe we can discuss about it in the...
Thank you very much. So the next opponent will be Professor van Buchem. He was also a member of your assessment committee. He's affiliated with the Department of Neuroradiology at Leiden University Medical Center, and I also would like to thank him that he will join today, and I'd like to give him the word. We have to look to the technical team, otherwise we switch to the next and we ask him later. Yes, we will do that. There's maybe an internet problem.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we now hear you. Exactly.
Okay, so can I speak? I have no connection to... Okay, can you hear me?
Just ask your question.
Okay, so the connection with the place is not perfect, but let me start. So first, Mr. Candidate, congratulations with an impressive piece of work. First, I'd like to ask one of the paronyms to read proposition number 8.
Beeldvormingstechnieken hebben potentie voor vroegdiagnostiek bij de ziekte van Alzheimer. Maar we mogen niet de rol van andere risico- en beschermende factoren negeren.
Thank you. So, Mr. Candidate, how should I operationalize this proposition? So, how can you translate it into practical terms? What do you mean?
First of all, thank you, our esteemed opponent, for your question and your compliments. Yeah. So, for example, the functional connectivity measure could potentially add prognostic value to the clinic, but there is, of course, limitations to that. Functional connectivity is known for having a relatively low test-retest reliability. So what I mean with this statement is that we should definitely not lose sight of risk factors like cardiovascular health, well, of course, the established tau and amyloid markers, education, like cognitive reserve factors, So yeah, I think it's very important that we keep those in mind and add them to the findings in this thesis, and not these findings on their own are not yet a prognostic. Yeah, don't have a lot of prognostic information yet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So let's spend a little bit more time on that. So if you go to page number 10 of your thesis, there's this famous Cliff-Jack plot of the sequential changes over time. So my question is the parameters that you analyzed in your thesis and that you put forward as well, biomarkers with potential value. Where would you plot them actually on the Cliff-Jack plot?
Where would I plot my findings on the plot? So for example, the findings in chapter 3, those might be plotted between the amyloid and tau in this plot. So in chapter 3, we see that even before amyloid reaches the clinical threshold, that tau and MHPG together might be able to give information about brain integrity. So yeah, that might be between the tau and amyloid lines here.
Okay, so that's interesting. So by combining imaging parameters with one of these molecular markers, you shift all the way to the left, correct?
Yeah. So you can
okay.
potentially improve the prognostic and diagnostic accuracy in combination with these other molecular markers. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so the next step would be there is a lot of other early imaging biomarkers of AD that have been explored in literature. Could you discuss how your new markers, how they relate to the existing and accepted imaging biomarkers, and if they have an added value compared to these?
I think it would be very interesting to look at FDG PET, for example, in combination with the network connectivity, to also see if the metabolism in these networks can also add additional information to memory decline. But again, I really would say that they are something that you add to the existing markers and not use them separately. So I think
maybe just to be more specific, if you take the locus coeruleus, that is kind of a new biomarker that you came up with that is not being explored a lot yet with AD. So how could they be brought into the picture? What could be the added value if there is any?
Yeah, so I think with the locus coeruleus, the chapter 5 goes into detail about this, but the difficult part there is that, of course, it's hard to image it. There's no consistent, widely agreed upon way to delineate it and measure the integrity of locus coeruleus. So I think the first step would be to really make sure that we agree on that, perhaps with a like a field-wide white paper on how to delineate the locus coeruleus. And once we've established that, then I think it's important to have longitudinal studies to see, can specific patterns of locus coeruleus degeneration tell us something about clinical progression, or can it tell us something about other cognitive markers associated with this, or sleep patterns. So I think the locus coeruleus has a lot of potential as a biomarker for Alzheimer's disease, but yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to really make it, to get it to that point, methodological points. Yeah.
Sure. So you've evolved into a scientist. You give me a scientific answer. That's correct. But try to think a little bit more out of the box. What could be really the added value? Because locus coeruleus is very different from many other structures in the brain. As you said, it is related to sleep patterns. During sleep, the glymphatic system becomes more active. So getting rid of amyloid is stimulated by sleep. So if you think about that and try to think a little bit out of the box, so what could be the added value of this specific biomarker in the future?
Well, I think the nice thing about that is that the sleep is, of course, something that's relatively easy to measure, right? With smartwatches, we can measure it to quite an accurate degree. So we can take this low accessible measure into the clinic to see how much value that sleep adds to the diagnostic process or the prognostic process, which, according to the findings in this thesis, does seem to relate to locus-related health. So that might be a very easy way to get a proxy of locus-related health in the clinic without necessarily having to go also to an MRI scan. So in that sense, I think it's a really nice small addition to the clinic there. Yeah.
Well, I think you're very modest. I think it could be a major contribution because it's probing something very different, and also something that's really maybe involved in the pathogenesis of the disease.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a second question. If I would be
Professor van Buchem, I just have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. There won't be a second question, so we have to proceed. I'm sorry. We have 4 more components.
Mr. Pro-Rector, I return the word to you. Thank you for being able to ask you some questions.
And thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Yeah, dear candidate, also from my side, first of all, congratulations on this impressive book, not least the cover. And thankfully, your presentation has already answered many questions that I could have had just on that. I enjoyed reading it. I think it shows how methodologically strong you are, but also you learned the whole span from sort of brain mechanisms, biochemistry, a lot of analysis techniques, and so forth. Now, for me as an physicist, I have to say, it was actually quite nice to see the stuff that we developed here in Maastricht together with Nikos and Heidi is now being used on stuff that I have fundamentally no understanding about. So it's really gone into application and been used on thousands of people here in Maastricht and around the world. And that is actually very nice to see. So to stay a little bit in my comfort zone, I would like to ask you about Chapter 5 and the segmentation approaches that you are trying to validate, in particular the manual segmentation, the univariate and the multivariate template approaches. And first of all, I'd like to invite you to say a bit about what motivated your choice of toolboxes and why are you comparing those 3 things?
Sorry,
What motivated your choice of particular toolbox and tools for that chapter?
Okay. Well, thank you, Hallie, esteemed opponents, for your questions and your kind words. So the main toolbox we used was the ANS toolbox, and this is just widely known. It's a very, very accurate, reliable toolbox, but it is not specialized for the brainstem, right? This is always the issue. But it's well regarded in the imaging field. So yeah, I think it's established, and that's why we use it. Yeah.
Yeah, I no doubt agree with that. I mean, one result that I found reassuring is that the automatic approach actually outperforms the manual, which I think until 4 or 5 years ago would have been the standard thing to do, very time-consuming, also subjective. Yeah. So that's good. But nevertheless, how does your findings translate to what other people do that do LC imaging? And what potential implications do you see, or problems, for having comparability across the different studies, what people do at different sites, even though within your own work, you seem to have gotten that under control. It seems to be extremely important to get the segmentation right for any thing that you conclude in this book. Yeah.
So with all the segmentation approaches, there are advantages, disadvantages, right? But I think most importantly, we just need to agree in the field, what are we going to do?
So how are you going to go about doing that, is I think what I'm getting at.
So I think what we need to do is something like I did here in Chapter 5, but at a larger scale, like really go add machine learning methods, other automated thresholding methods that might be interesting. And also the methods that I did here to really get to investigate them in a large sample, also preferably including patients. And include many experts in this paper. Like I think we really need a nice large paper with experts in this field to investigate this. Like I would say once for all, but to really get a grip on what's the best way to do this? Can we agree on that? What is the most ideal way to do this, and then just stick to that? Because then we can eliminate, or as good as possible, we can eliminate findings that may be due to the methods rather than sample or investigated variables.
Indeed, indeed. I think that sort of initiative would be
Yeah.
quite needed. I mean, from looking at also the other chapters. Maybe leading on from this a little bit, I mean, talking about the clinical applicability of LC imaging, including LC segmentation, and potentially going in the direction of using the various biomarkers, imaging biomarkers for, the tracking of pharmaceutical interventions, for instance, for sleep improving or whatnot.
Yeah.
Do you think the LC segmentation at this point is anywhere near accurate enough to be used at single patient or single subject level, and will we ever get there?
It depends in what setting you use it, because I think these methods, for example, the univariate method here, it works really well if you have a homogeneous sample. So if you're looking at a patient sample, for example, prognosis, how does the locus coeruleus health relate to memory decline or conversion, and you have a very homogeneous sample, which Alzheimer's disease is not sure, is it very homogeneous, but it could work. But yeah, this definitely would have to be validated in a study to investigate its prognostic value at this point. And for now, I would say that the univariate method seems very promising, but again, that's where I would say a large white paper would be very helpful. So would I say that right now it's in the state of being used in the clinic? I would say be careful and not yet, but we're getting there for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Proactive, we have 1 more minute?
Short question.
A short question. Well, I mean, my personal interest always when I look at people that scan so much, how much have you been struggling with the inclusivity of patients being scanned at ultra-high field, and do you think we are at the point where nearly everybody in the patient populations could benefit from being scanned at ultra-high field?
For the locus coeruleus, for sure. The quality of the 7T image is so nice compared to.
I'm talking implants and MR safety.
Ah, like that, right. Well, I mean, you're the expert on safety measures in regards, but.
Well, you're the one telling me how many you could not scan. That's what I'm after.
Sorry?
You're the one telling me how much you could not scan. That is actually the number I'm more interested in.
Yeah. Too many, especially with patients. That's a problem, right? Because people are. They're patients that have a lot of comorbidities, including prosthesis, all kinds of.
So what percentage? Okay, I'm done. Okay, well, with that I will thank you. Wish your space traveling Santa Claus gives you lots of new insights, and with that I'll return to the prorector.
Many patients, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I give you one question. Okay, we will continue with with Dr. van Bokstel. He was also a member of your assessment committee, and he is affiliated with our university, and I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, I'm also very impressed by the work that you presented. I really like the fundamental work in combination with the clinical applications that you also thought through, and I know how much effort you have put into this work. And you were always at the office, also in Corona times, always looking into your data, and this has been quite a job, and you're still not finished with that, but the results so far are very promising. And also I think the cover is very nice. It's not science fiction, hopefully, that you wrote into the book. It's a very serious matter that you've been talking about. My questions are again on chapter 6. The proposition is already read, so I don't have to ask one of the paradigms to read that. So it's about the negative association that you find between the integrity of the locus coeruleus and aspects of subjective sleep quality. And you presented this as one of the main findings of your study. I also come back to that in your the impact paragraph. So you really make a big point out of that. And I looked into it quite closely in chapter 6. So first I was a little bit confused because in table 2 on page 134, there seems to be kind of a mix-up. I think you have mixed a few columns there. So model 1 is the right, I think model 2 is the left, and model 3 should be the bilateral one, but it's something to look into later. That was at least what I could deduce from the text. But about the association that you found, you reported this association, and I'm really not convinced about that this association is there for a few reasons. First, there is no effect on the sleep scale itself. You use the Groningen sleep scale to measure the overall effect of subjective sleep in relation to your variable. There's no effect. We also know from the literature that there is no strong correlation between subjective measures and objective measures of sleep, particularly not in people with, let's say, depressive symptoms. That's already another important fact. And if you look at the actual size of the effect, you can say it's a very small effect, isn't it? It's an R of 0.09. That means we talk here about 1% of explained variance, which is very, very, very low. You also find it only for one part of the locus coeruleus and not for the other part. So you look at different aspects of the locus coeruleus and different aspects of sleep. And I can imagine, yeah, you have looked at many other aspects as well. I'm not sure how many, but there is no indication on if there has been any control for multiple comparisons, for example. So did you look into that? So overall, I think this is a very bold statement to make, that this is a very impactful sign, because I'm not sure if this would be, can it be replicated? That's my main question. So could you reflect on that? Is this association real? And what should be done if you have doubts about that?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your questions and your very kind words. Of course, the hard work is not just done by me, but also by Linda as my paranymph.
Teamwork.
Yes. So the thing is, I think I'm already very happy that we found this relatively small effect, because the other thing is that the caudal part of the locus coeruleus is quite hard to image. So I think if we can improve the methodology there, this effect size might be further improved. But I'm very happy already that these results connect locus coeruleus integrity to sleep quality. I think it's a very important start to indeed to also bring it to the clinic, right? So sleep quality can be very important for perhaps prognostic cases.
Why did you find it, you think, on the overall questionnaire? So where you have multiple aspects of sleep quality summarized in one score, and you didn't find any association there?
Yeah, indeed. So we know that in more advanced stages of Alzheimer's disease, there's more widespread decline of sleep quality. But here specifically, we found that nocturnal awakening as a factor, which I think is interesting because that's exactly where the locus coeruleus is involved. Right? It's the waking process. So again, there I'm very happy that we see this in these people who are cognitively healthy, and I would really like to extend this study to also include a patient population and see there maybe indeed we see insomnia associated with locus coeruleus or other sleep measures. And also these were indeed subjective questionnaires. So I also really like to extend this research to include, like smartwatch measures. These technologies are evolving rapidly, so we can get nice, accurate sleep measures. So there's definitely a lot to be gained from adding these measures to the research. Yeah.
So this particular estimate that you got of the number of awakenings, so it's actually the number of awakenings that you asked for. Because I know the sleep quality question itself, there's also a question in there that asks specifically about awakenings. Okay. So probably you have asked it twice, so there's one time an answer yes, no, and there's one time an answer number of. Yeah. Did you look at the particular item as well, if you could confirm that in a kind of a sensitivity analysis? Because if you have two times the answer, it might be interesting to look at that as well.
I don't have that specific information, but I can imagine that if you have a question about how many times you wake up at night, that it gives you a measure of magnitude. Right? So people who wake up a lot more than someone who does not wake up at night might be much more accurate indicator of, for example, locus coeruleus degeneration. So I think that increased variance that you have there, the increased information you have, might explain that you find a change in the number of awakenings, but not a yes/no question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could underlie this discrepancy.
Okay. Is there time for still one small? No, I have to finish. Okay.
No,
Thank you
that's
very
no
much.
time. We still have 2 more opponents to go. So I would like to give to the next opponent, Dr. Ramakers. She's affiliated with our university in the Department of Psychiatry and Neuropsychology. And I'll give her for the next 6 minutes.
Thank you. Dear candidate, well, I also would like to congratulate you with this very nice work. I also want to include the team of you in my congratulations. And I was very impressed by your clear overview and your presentation earlier today. For now, I want to discuss a bit more also about Chapter 6 with you. Well, in this study, you used 72 participants to investigate the relation between this locus coeruleus integrity and sleep. And to start, I want to have a closer look whether these subjects indeed are cognitively unimpaired, because you use the criterion that they should have cognition above -2 standard deviation above the mean. And when we look into the literature, then we see that also other criteria use this range, but then to define mild cognitive impairment. So an example is the DSM-5, which used the range between -1 and -2 standard deviation to define a mild neurocognitive disorder. So there is some overlap. So my first question is whether you could convince me a bit more that your subjects are really cognitively unimpaired.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. So you're asking if we could you more about whether these people are indeed cognitively healthy. So indeed, the sample we have, I think actually we would expect the opposite problem, because again they go into the MRI scanner and they have if you have specific exclusion criteria related to that, like the implants, but also eyesight problems for this study were important as an exclusion criteria. So I think we might have the opposite problem where we have an extremely healthy sample.
Okay.
I wouldn't be too worried that perhaps these people are cognitively impaired, but there might be a slight bias in fact to the healthy side. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know any more detailed information about their cognition? So I saw the MMSE is mentioned in the table, which is quite high, about 29. So that I was convinced with that. Yeah. But do you have any other tests? Were there any other tests used to measure this?
Yeah. So also with all of our participants, we of course we do the MPO, the measures, and if we as researchers have an indication that perhaps these people are struggling with the tests, then we do refer that to the study doctor to investigate further. Is this perhaps a non-cognitively healthy person? And then indeed we also exclude them from the study if that is the case. Yeah.
Okay. Could you tell me a bit more about the inclusion? So how was the recruitment?
So the recruitment was it was just a convenience sample. So anyone was asked. So there were advertisements in papers.
Okay.
There were flyers handed out. So this was a very, in that sense, non-biased sample. But indeed, we would exclude some people who did not meet inclusion criteria related to scanning, to eye tracking.
Yeah. So it was. I mentioned it because I think that it's not well done, but more because I think that it could be also a very interesting subgroup when you have people in this lower range of cognitive performance. Yeah. Then maybe also it would be worth to have a closer look into that and to have a post hoc analysis to look whether there are differences. Yeah. Because also tau was involved, so there should be a range also in the tau concentration of your sample, because otherwise you probably did not have found this effect.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a subsample in this group which could tell you more about the pathology.
Yeah. No, indeed. So we found that the relationship between the locus coeruleus integrity and the sleep, the awakenings, was particularly strong in the high tau group.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps indeed there is, like even earlier, like a preclinical subset of cognitively healthy, or well, at that point still cognitively unimpaired people that we investigated here. And that makes the locus coeruleus, I think, especially interesting as a potential biomarker. If at this point we can already see a difference between people with a better or worse locus coeruleus integrity to predict sleep problems, this could be very valuable indeed the preclinical phase to identify early changes related to locus coeruleus and tau.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be closed by Dr. Janssen. I would like to invite her. She is affiliated with also the Department of Psychiatry and Neuropsychology at this university, and I would like to give her the word too.
Thank you. Dear candidates, congratulations on finalizing your thesis, and my compliments to you and also to your team for this important and also very cohesive work. My first question relates to the recent developments in the Alzheimer's disease clinical trial field, of which I think you're aware. So the lecanemab trial showed us that in amyloid-positive participants with MCI or mild AD dementia, lecanemab produced markers of amyloid, and in those early Alzheimer's disease groups, and that resulted in moderately less decline on measures of cognition and clinical function than placebo at 18 months. These trial results were published on November 29th, when your thesis was in press already, or maybe even distributed, I assume. And based on the results of this trial, I'm wondering if you still support your statement number 7 about pharmaceutical trials not achieving the desired results as they're aiming for treatment instead of prevention, or if you would like to revise this statement.
Well, esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and your question. So I think in this case, what I'm mostly referring to with this statement is that we shouldn't try to treat Alzheimer's disease once the diagnosis is made, and because I think at this point there's so much damage in the brain that it's very hard to come back from that. You would need next to impossible, I think. With prevention, I mean to prevent the disease from coming to the point where we reach this irreversible stage. And yeah, so I think if this trial indeed proves to become a very effective medicine in the end, we might have to revise the statement. But yeah, even there, I think if we can apply this medicine even earlier, right, before we get to the MCI stage or the amyloid positive stage, we might be able to prevent it rather than treat it afterwards. If we can take, for example, people with the negative network correlations and high amyloid, can we, for example, already in the cognitively healthy stage apply this medicine? And yeah, preferably also with a smaller sample size, because there's a lot of side effects associated with this medicine, of course.
Yeah, thanks. So early identification remains important. Yeah, I agree. Also, another aspect that you mentioned that should be improved for pharmaceutical trials is the trial recruitment strategies. I'm wondering what other aspects of trials should be improved, and how could these be improved based on the results of your chapter 2?
Yeah. So, well, I think chapter 2 very nicely shows that, like I said, the sample size can be reduced, right? So if we have medications like lecanemab that also report the side effects that can be potentially dangerous, adding a measure of network connectivity can reduce that risk factor, right? it can also reduce the costs of the research. If we like MRI scan, of course, is expensive initially, but if you follow up these participants for 10 years, let's say, and you can reduce the sample size by 80%, then of course in the long term that can really reduce the cost of such a trial. Yeah, it just makes it more reasonable to do this kind of research, clinical trials.
Yeah, so those are some strategies for selection enhancement. Could those measure, or do you also have any recommendations to use specific biomarker endpoints, for example, the markers you tested in chapter 2, or any cognitive endpoints or clinical endpoints that we should use?
Yeah, so of course it would be important to look at clinical conversion rates, right? But specifically here in chapter 2, we see this effect on memory decline. All right, so I think memory is an important endpoint to consider. Yeah, but ideally we also look at the conversion rates. But another thing we can look at is the locus coeruleus health. Right? If the locus coeruleus is indeed so important in the early Alzheimer's disease, I think locus coeruleus health could be also become an important endpoint in such research. Right? If we apply, because we know that amyloid also interacts with tau, so if we apply anti-amyloid medication, can it also reduce tau toxicity and in turn also preserve locus coeruleus health? That would also be a very interesting endpoint.
I assume you finished your answer. I noticed. Okay. Mr. Van Hooren, the time appointed for defending your thesis has now passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss not so much the quality of your thesis, but has been approved, but the way you have defended this thesis this afternoon. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return to this room. Thank you very much.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Dear Mr. Van Hooren, the commission, the degree committee here present, has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. And I think it's maybe also nice for your family that I continue a little bit in Dutch as well. That's maybe nicer, okay? So I will repeat in Dutch. Geachte heer Van Hooren, de commissie hier aanwezig heeft zich beraden over de kwaliteit van die proefschrift en de wijze waarop je dit proefschrift hedenmiddag heeft verdedigd. Op grond van haar positief oordeel, maar ook gelet op de examens vroeger door u afgelegd, heeft ze besloten u het gevraagde doctoraat toe te kennen. Zowel dokter Jacobs als professor Verheij is gemachtigd u, en omdat professor Verheij vandaag hier aanwezig is, om op gebruikelijke wijze met deze waardigheid te bekleden, dat hij deze bulk kan overhandigen. En daarom geef ik graag het woord nu aan uw tweede promotor, professor Verheij.
Ja, volgens de traditie beginnen we met de eed, wetenschappelijk eed. Belooft u dat u altijd volgens de beginselen van de wetenschappelijke integriteit te werk zult gaan, eerlijk en zorgvuldig, transparant, onafhankelijk en verantwoordelijk?
Dat beloof ik.
Krachtens de bevoegdheid ons door de wet toegekend en volgens het besluit van de commissie hier tegenwoordig, verklaar ik hierbij u, Roy Willem Elisabeth van Hooren, tot dokter te bevorderen en u alle rechten te verlenen die daaraan volgens wet en gewoonte zijn verbonden. En ten bewijze hiervan overhandig ik nu de bul door rector, secretaris en de overgeleden van de promotiecommissie ondertekend met het grootzegel van de universiteit bevestigd.
Ja,
eerste.
Beste dokter Van Hooren, Roy, you did it. Over deze dag en dit moment hebben we zo vaak gesproken. En ik weet dat je de afgelopen jaren hier zo hard voor gewerkt hebt en naartoe geleefd hebt. Ik weet dat je de verdediging best wel spannend vond. Soms keek je met heel veel enthousiasme daarnaar uit. En hadden we hele lange gesprekken over de discussies die plaats gingen vinden. Soms was er ook wat onrust. Maar de prestatie die we vandaag gezien hebben, is een voortzetting en een reflectie van je gedrevenheid, je nieuwsgierigheid en ook je liefde voor de wetenschap die ik meer dan de afgelopen 4 jaar heb gezien. Je passie en je vastberadenheid om in de wetenschap te stappen werden voor mij heel duidelijk in 2016. En ik weet niet of je het nog herinnert, maar in 2016 stuurde jij mij een e-mail. Je was net klaar met je masteropleiding psychologie. En je had via andere PhD-studenten in mijn groep gehoord over ons onderzoek. En je stuurde mij een vraag of ik nog op zoek was naar PhD-studenten of onderzoeksassistenten. Want onderzoek doen naar dementie en dat gecombineerd met neuroimaging, dat was waar je hart naar uitging. Nou, op dat moment merkte ik onmiddellijk al je no-nonsense, je to-the-point zijn. Want toen ik jouw cv kreeg, toen zag ik geen 4 pagina's lang informatie waarop ik alle relevante details moest zoeken. Maar ik zag een beknopte halve pagina met bullet points, die je opleiding, je stage, je ervaring met fMRI aangaven, maar ook je interesse in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Dat ben ik nooit vergeten. Nou, jammer genoeg hadden we op dat moment geen open posities. Maar je was zo enthousiast en je wilde zo graag deelnemen aan ons onderzoek, dat na wat gesproken we de mogelijkheid hadden gevonden om je 1 dag per week aan te stellen. En jij greep dat met beide handen aan. Nou, gedurende die periode zou je dan ook bijdragen aan al het lopende onderzoek. Je zou eigen analyses doen met het oog op een eventuele publicatie. Het viel mij onmiddellijk op dat in een mum van tijd pikte jij nieuwe dingen op. Het uitzoeken van gegevens in internationale onderzoeksdatabases, nieuwe programmeertalen leren, complexe statistiek uitvoeren, nieuwe fMRI-methoden leren. Het was zo leuk en zo inspirerend om te zien hoe iedereen blij was met jouw aanwezigheid op de afdeling, jouw hulp, maar ook vooral hoe jij langzaamaan je eigen onderzoeksideeën ontwikkelde. Jij bent niet bang voor programmeren, voor statistiek of voor complexe vraagstellingen. Je geniet van het zoeken van oplossingen. Je geniet ervan om te zoeken naar wat de beste manier is om iets aan te pakken. En dat harde werk en jouw snelle progressie liet ook zien dat er in minder dan een jaar een manuscript klaar lag. Dat is nu je tweede hoofdstuk geworden in je boekje. En dat werk leverde je ook een uitnodiging op om een presentatie te geven, je allereerste presentatie op een congres in Brussel. Ik was toen, net zoals nu, in Boston. En ik kon er helaas ook niet bij zijn. Maar ik kreeg via WhatsApp van de Belgische collega's te horen hoe men onder de indruk was van je prestatie. En dat talent, jouw enthousiasme, dat ging niet onopgemerkt voorbij. En samen met hulp van Frans zijn we er toen in geslaagd om een PhD-plek voor jou te creëren. En die PhD-plek vond plaats op het STRAIN-project, samen met Linda, je paranymfje nu. Het was een groot project. We gingen kijken naar de allereerste hersenveranderingen die de ziekte van Alzheimer konden voorspellen. Linda zou kijken naar de rol van stress. En jij zou je focussen op het accuraat meten van de locus coeruleus en hoe die dan veranderen tijdens veroudering en bij de eerste signalen of symptomen van dementie. Nou, al in het begin was duidelijk dat Linda en jij een goed team waren. Jullie vulden elkaar perfect aan, zowel in skills als in persoonlijkheid. Linda was een meer talkative person, jij was een wat rustige, programmerende persoon. En samen hebben jullie een enorme hoeveelheid werk verzet. Meer dan 100 mensen namen deel aan deze studie. Zelfs tijdens de pandemie vond je manieren om op een veilige manier de dataverzameling verder door te zetten. Een enorme prestatie. En ook data die nu uiteindelijk een belangrijk deel van je proefschrift hebben gevormd. En ik kan wel zeggen dat ik ervan overtuigd ben dat niemand die data beter kent dan jij. Gedurende meer dan een jaar heb jij op allerlei manieren geprobeerd om de locus coeruleus te meten. Van het manueel aftekenen van alle scans, wat echt een monnikenwerk was, tot het eindeloos blijven uitproberen van verschillende registratiealgoritmes, aanpassen van wel of niet inbrengen van andere anatomiescans, het verhogen van de iteraties, het wel of niet normaliseren van scans. Ik weet dat er af en toe een zucht kwam over hoe lang de computer erover deed om dan je uiteindelijk die segmentatie te leveren. Maar je zei dan ook vaak, meten is weten. En je beet door totdat we een paar goede metingen in handen hadden. Je bleef natuurlijk kritisch en dat zien we ook in je proefschrift. Je liet zien dat als wetenschapper we moeten kritisch blijven kijken naar alle methoden, rekening blijven houden met alle voordelen, beperkingen en ook de impact van onze methode op onze bevindingen. Jouw sterke motivatie om kritisch te blijven, om wetenschap transparant te maken, integer te zijn, blijkt ook uit je stellingen vandaag. En dat maakt jou een echte goede wetenschapper. En ik hoorde vandaag ook een van de collega's hier opmerken dat je een echte wetenschappelijke denker bent. En dat is ook iets wat ik de afgelopen 4 jaar gezien heb. Je bent iemand die houdt van problemen. Zoeken naar manieren om iets te onderzoeken. Nieuwsgierigheid naar de complexiteit van het brein, maar ook naar het zonnestelsel. Zoals je laat zien op je boekje. En je houdt van coderen. Dus een wetenschapper met hoog nerdgehalte, zoals we dat zeggen. En dat is in ons werkveld een compliment, zoals je weet. En ik moet toegeven dat ik soms bezorgd was dat je te vaak of te veel alles zelf wilde uitzoeken. Maar dan hoorde ik van Maxime over de nog meer nerdy overlegmomenten tussen jullie. En dan wist ik dat het wel goed kwam. Nou, Roy, ik heb je niet alleen leren kennen als een degelijke, kritische en goede wetenschapper. Ik heb ook andere kanten van je gezien. De rustige, betrouwbare, optimistische persoon met een groot hart en een liefde voor koffie. Je hebt een grote liefde voor katten. Midas, die onlangs helaas overleden is, die dan nu op de cover mag staan van je boekje, maar ook je andere 2 katten. Je betrouwbare, gulle, collegiale kant. De vele stagiaires die jij door hun scriptie hebt geholpen. Je collegaatje Elise, die altijd om hulp kon vragen bij het scannen, zelfs in die laatste stressvolle maanden. En uiteraard ook je grote liefde voor je vriendin en je familie. Je blijft gelukkig nog even bij ons. Je blijft nog even verder werken, totdat jij op zoek gaat naar de volgende uitdaging in de wetenschap, in het brein of in het zonnestelsel. En ik mag het nu wel zeggen, dokter Van Hooren, dat is nou je officiële titel. Ik wil je namens Frans en namens Maxime van harte feliciteren met deze welverdiende mijlpaal. Mijn felicitaties gaan ook uit naar je familie en naar je vriendin Mathilde. En ik geef hierbij graag het woord terug aan de prorector.
Dank u wel, dan hebben we nu de gelegenheid om te klappen. Geachte dokter Van Hooren, het doet mij genoegen om straks deze zitting te beëindigen, maar alvorens we dat gaan doen, wil ik u van natuurlijk namens onze Universiteit Maastricht van harte feliciteren met uw nieuwe titel, officieel. Het is een mijlpaal, het is de hoogste titel die je wel aan onze academische instituten kunnen verwerven. Ik wil in mijn gelukwens natuurlijk ook betrekken het promotieteam, die u in de afgelopen 4 jaar en 3 maanden naar dit punt hebben bereikt. Ook mijn groeten gaat ook naar het verre Boston, aan de andere kant van, waar in een vroeg uur vanochtend dokter Jacobs heeft plaatsgenomen achter het scherm. Ik wilde ook van harte danken onze 2 gasten van buiten, professor Reeds naar Aachen. Recht herzlichen Dank dat ze heute Nachmittag aanwezig waren. Dankeschön. En natuurlijk ook onze groet naar collega van Buchem naar het Leidse. Dank je dat u aanwezig was en dat u vragen hebt kunnen stellen. Ook naar de overige leden van onze promotiecommissie wil ik danken dat ze toch allemaal in de gelegenheid zijn geweest om hun 6 minuten optimaal te gebruiken om vragen te stellen. Nou, dan gaan mijn gelukwensen natuurlijk ook naar de familie hier op de eerste rij. Ik zag dat u allen afkomstig bent, oorspronkelijk uit Valkenburg aan de Geul, maar nu allemaal uit Stein afkomstig zijn. En Stein is dus vlak in de buurt van Elslo. En ik woon zelf in Bunde, dus ik dacht van, dat komt goed uit. Dat is weer een goede link die we daar kunnen leggen naar het Limburgse Heuvelland. We gaan nu sluiten. We gaan nu nog iets drinken. Ik weet niet wat we gaan drinken, maar we gaan iets drinken. Ik neem aan, meer dan een kop koffie zal het toch wel zijn. Misschien een glaasje pils erbij, weet ik wat. Maar goed, we gaan sluiten. En dat betekent dat ik officieel deze zitting sluit. Is nu gesloten. En hoe gaan we nu verder? Er is een receptie. En ik wil vragen aan het publiek om alvast naar de refter te gaan. De refter is de ruimte waar zo meteen de receptie zal plaatsvinden. Vervolgens gaan de mensen die online zijn, die gaan ons verlaten. En we maken nog een tweede foto op de trappen van de universiteit, alvorens wij ook jullie komen vergezellen bij de vla en de koffie in de refterruimte. Met dank.